Just so you know, this is my Twitter handle if you don't already see it. It's popping up on Side Talk Northwest. But just I'm going to be sharing some resources during the slides that you can get through my Twitter, so it should be easy to get there. So I guess so we've been talking a lot about science communication generally. This morning about the media. We've been talking a lot about social media, about storytelling. But there's still some question of I think even many of us, we go to social media and we're thinking about communicating and we're like, do we really have to do this? Is it really worth anything? What is the point? Why do we care about sharing in social media? Is it just because it's one more thing we have to do? Or is there actually a point to it? And so I really like this quote by Christy Wilcox, who was an editor recently on a guide to science blogging and is a science writer. And she said, social media platforms aren't just digital water coolers. They're the way the world is networking and communicating. They are how and where we share information with friends, colleagues, acquaintances, and anyone and everyone else. So, I think increasingly, social media is where we're getting information. It's where people are getting their news. It's where teens are getting any kind of information. And so it really becomes important to share our own experiences and our scientific research on these mediums. And I'll talk more about what that can look like. This is just one great Instagrammer that I really like, who shares her experiences from the field, and she does videos, and she does all kinds of things that really show people what a scientist looks like, and what scientific research would look like on a day-to-day basis. So, social media, why is it important? Well, first of all, it's important to our audiences. So, Americans today get the top source of science news is now the internet. So, not very long ago, that was TV. And so it's a big deal that that's the internet, and increasingly that is social media, because that's where people are going to go on the internet to find scientific information. And then a majority of teens now and other adults will get their news from social media. So they might not be necessarily going directly to science news sites. They're seeing their news on Facebook. They're getting their news from Instagram and Snapchat. And so this is a really big deal for, researchers, scientists and science communicators being on social media to kind of, be where the people are, essentially. And so, but another reason it's important is because it impacts us as researchers. So, there's plenty of studies, the results are kind of back and forth, but there's definitely studies that show highly tweeted scientific articles are also highly cited. So there is some kind of correlation between kind of social media buzz around peer-reviewed research papers and how often those are getting cited. So, to me, this makes sense because if we think about where, as scientists, are we getting our information about scientific research out there? I know that personally when I'm looking through, sure, I go to scientific journals and Google Scholar to search, but a research article might pop up from a colleague who researches science communication, and I see it on Twitter. And I see that person's, maybe I follow a certain researcher, and I see that they have a new article that they just tweeted out about, and I read it, and I might cite it in my next paper. So, the fact that other researchers are following us on social media as researchers, if we share our papers, it would make sense that people following us might cite them more often, and they might get more views. So there is some kind of association here between us doing social media surrounding our research and it having impact in the scientific community and beyond, especially beyond, if other people can access that information. And so, so we've kind of touched the public, we've kind of touched impact of social media for us as researchers, but there's also, when we talk about science in the media, of course there's still a huge role for traditional science reporting. But a lot of the venues for that reporting has changed, and the venues for science journalism have changed. And so, over the years, have we seen a loss of science sections in our local newspapers, and it's getting harder and harder to pay for, full-time science journalists. We've seen a rise in kind of these digital-first, online-only sources of science information. Things like BuzzFeed being really great, hiring up amazing science reporters and doing hard-hitting science journalism is things that we might not have thought would happen, 10 years ago. And so the media landscape is changing for science journalism. And so that's, another reason why it could be important to focus on social media. And so social media is this way for us to tell these stories about science. And it's not just, it's also a different way of telling stories. It can be these more personal stories, these more like in-the-moment stories, because we can live stream on Periscope. It can be right in the moment when we found this new made this scientific discovery, or we're thinking through a process, or we're in the field, and we can share that in the moment. Those in-the-moment insights, that's a big deal for showing other people who might have no idea what science looks like otherwise. And so it can also be these experience-driven stories, showing people, taking people on the journey that is our life as scientists or our scientific research projects. Social media is a great way to do that and get that information out to people that, people in the media that might pick it up. And it can also be collaborative stories. So all of a sudden we can tell stories on social media where other researchers can take part, where citizens can take part, and we can tell these stories that become, very collaborative. And so it can be really neat. So we can't even go through all the different social media outlets. There's just tons and tons and tons, and it comes down to, on a personal level, like what you feel comfortable with, and where your audience is, and kind of all kinds of considerations of what types of social media you might be using. So I see all that, and then I guess in a research presentation, I can always say something about me. It was funny, on the way over here, I took an Uber, and he was asking me what I was going to be talking about, and I said social media, whatever, and he's like, how many followers do you have on Twitter? And I was like, around 8,000, and he's like, 8,000 only? And they're asking you talk about social media? It's like 8,000 other science communicators is actually a pretty big deal. So social media has been really important to me. As a scientist, people have asked me why I got into social media, but it wasn't really like a choice, I'm going to do social media versus something else. It just started, and it took me from a career in science. I started a science blog. I started thinking, wow, could I actually do this for a living? And I changed career path and got a PhD in mass communication. And it just was it was a way for me to move to a different career, really. It is what got me there. So it's been so important. My science blog was essentially how I applied to grad school with no background in communication at all. My science blog has been a way for me to connect with other colleagues and do collaborative research. My social media presence has helped me crowdfund research that, for my dissertation, I crowdfunded, a science project to do a survey of science bloggers. I crowdfunded $6,000. It's not huge, it's not, no NSF grant, but it was just enough money for me to do my PhD research, and there's no way I would have gotten it without being on social media and having a large network of people who saw my research and cared about it. So it can be a way to have impact. And now my social media is basically what got me my current job, doing social media for the College of Science at LSU. And so it's been really important to me on a personal level. It's from career path to kind of personal engagement with other researchers. So a little bit switching gears, but not really. So I also research social media related to science communication. And so I've done studies on science blogging practices, so what science bloggers, how they decide what to write about and what the practices are, and then also on readers of science blogs. And so I'm going to present you some of the results of that, just as kind of a case study. So imagine this is, I think the results here go beyond just science blogs, but it's really understanding why people care about this information, why researchers care to blog, why readers care to read these things, and it might apply to other forms of social media as well. So for my dissertation, I conducted a survey of science bloggers and found that, first of all, kind of background is that science blogs, they are an important source of information. They've been around for a while now, but they are a leading source of science information out there. And a lot of journalists actually look at blogs. They might not always link to them or cite them in kind of formal journalistic outlets, but they are reading these things and paying attention to them. And so science blogs, as a form of social media, written a lot of times by scientists, they can provide these perspectives, these personal perspectives, these insights from experts that we might not normally get if the experts, scientists didn't have this means of communicating directly with broad audiences or lay audiences. And so in my study of science blogs and science bloggers and how they decided what to write about, these are just some key themes that came out about how science bloggers go about blogging. So like what their approach is. So these are kind of like an order of importance from interviews I did with science bloggers, like their approach to science blogging. So you can see like one of the first ones that when I was interviewing people, the most often mentioned thing was that they were focused on their audience and focused on kind of this popular science type of mode. So really getting people interested in science, writing exciting stories about science. And I think this is where a lot of science bloggers, scientists have a lot of fun, just sharing science and why it's cool and really focusing on the audience and why they care about it. And then right after that is also writing for myself. So I mean, as a scientist who's not paid to blog, there has to be a personal motivation in that pursuit too. So whether it's to improve their writing skills or just kind of to have fun or to procrastinate from doing lab work, that writing for yourself and having it be fun for yourself, there's some studies that kind of make that a dichotomy between that and writing for a broader audience, but they actually go really well together. Because if you're writing for yourself just to have fun and to get away from lab work, it often means that other people are going to be really excited about that because it's probably fun stuff that you just really want to write about. But sometimes writing for yourself and thinking like, I'm not going to write this unless I really care about this or unless it's really interesting to me, that often works really well with writing for a popular audience actually. And so some of the other ones were a journalistic approach. Some bloggers will kind of pick up these, what are other science journalists doing out there? What is, someone like Ed Young doing? How can I copy him to get a broader audience? So science, even as scientists, we might pick up some journalistic practices, even though we're definitely not journalists in many ways, just in trying to write for a broader audience beyond just other scientists. And what I'm going to talk about next is kind of this really interesting thing that was this last point about an ecosystem approach, kind of thinking of us, when we're engaging in social media and science blogs, thinking like, okay, I'm part of a bigger system here. There's other people out there writing about this form of science, but I don't see many people writing in this area. Maybe I'll focus on this. Or I have a personal insight here that other people don't have. I'm going to focus on that. So it's kind of looking around you and deciding how you fit into this big media ecosystem and what you can add that adds value. So related to that is kind of this theme that came out of my dissertation, was that science bloggers are kind of focusing on how can they be different in these ways. So this ecosystem approach of kind of reading other science blogs out there, taking a look, finding what may be missing from traditional media related to your science area, and then really finding a niche, deciding what can you add that doesn't seem to be out there. Is there not a blog already on sustainable nanotechnology, and it seems to be a field where I can really add something because not many people are talking about it? Or do I have personal insights or field research that I can show pictures or anything that other people are not adding out there to that media ecosystem? And then this value-added blogging is sort of similar. It's like, do I have a personal insight that I can write about? I'm not just going to write a news story that's just the facts that anyone else could write about. I'm going to add something that only I know from my research or from my field experiences. And so it's really adding value to out there. And I think this is actually what a lot of media outlets will pick up. Like if they see you blogging these things that aren't already out there and they're really adding your personal expertise and they really add value to what's already out there, I think it could tend to be picked up more. So kind of a summary from that was, science bloggers are really driven by these personal motivations, but also wanting to have an impact on audiences, to get people interested in science. But they also desire to kind of correct misinformation out there. Like the more you look at social media, you might find that there's negative things out there about your field of science that you want to correct. And so they're also writing about that and kind of what's missing. Like this, all the media is covering this field of science, but they're missing this perspective, so I'm going to write about it. So that's what I found in interviewing science bloggers and surveying them. That's the kind of things that they're focusing on. So next, I wanted to look at, so I've done this study on science bloggers. I really wanted to know more about the readers. So why are people reading science blogs? Why do they care about this? And so I did this survey of science blog readers by taking a random sample of science blogs that I've done for my dissertation and pulling, random like 40 of them and then surveying their readers. So it ended up being about 3,000 readers of science blogs. And this is just some breakdown of like who they were. So the gender is a little bit, it's not a full picture because these days there's a lot of people that won't report gender like in surveys. So they might not say they prefer not to answer or something like that. And so you get a bigger number there, but it's kind of slightly more male than female. But basically, the biggest point here is that these people are really well educated. They're really smart, sophisticated people that are looking into blogs. Like, they're active audiences. They're not just, most of them probably aren't just happening across the science blog. I mean, they might, but they're really looking for information that's there. They're an active audience. They're educated. They're motivated to read these blogs for a certain reason. And so, many of them are interested in pursuing a career in science, but not all of them. And many of them might consider themselves to be a researcher or someone in the scientific field. So it's still, I guess we could look at it in both positive or negative as being sort of an audience of people that already might be interested in science, but still there could be a lot of people here that we might be reaching that might not otherwise read about science. And so what I really focused on, though, and what I wanted to present in this talk was kind of their motivation. So, if we really want to cater to our audiences, one of the most important things we can know about them is what their motivations are. So instead of just, their gender, or their occupation, why do they really care to read what we're writing about? And so the top motivations that came from other research, but that popped up in this survey of science blog readers was, first of all, entertainment. It's like, I want to be entertained. Why am I going to spend time on this science blog if it's not fun, if it's not exciting? Entertainment is a driving factor. And after that was ambience, so it's kind of like reading because the writing is really good, because it tells a good story, but also because it gives the perspective of the person of the author, of the blogger. So this is a big deal because, they might choose to read a science blog because it includes a personal insight from this researcher or their own experiences, as opposed to a news story that's just the facts, because they want the perspective of the author. So that's why they're reading the blog. So for those of you who are scientists and engaging in social media, it's important to realize that people might want your personal perspectives. They don't just want you to leave all that stuff out. That might be why they're choosing to go to you versus reading the New York Times or something. And after that was for information that's largely not found anywhere else, this unique pieces of information that they can't read about by reading the New York Times. It's this really specific pieces of information that they're looking for that they can find in science blogs or any form of social media. And then finally, community was actually the least of the motivations, but I'll show you in a second. There's some people that value this more. This is really kind of wanting to talk to people, wanting to engage in a community. It might be other science bloggers, other people who write about science who really want to start connecting with people, and they have a community-driven motivation to engage in social media. And so what we found in doing this survey of science bloggers is there's three kind of big types of science blog readers, and it's driven by, we broke these up, we clustered them by their motivations to read. And so at the top you have these what we call one-way information users. So they don't really, you might not ever know that they're there, because they're probably not retweeting you, they're probably not sharing your blog, they're probably not commenting, but they're reading largely for entertainment. And also they tend to still be highly educated, but not necessarily have high education in science. So this kind of tracks with other research that shows that people with lower levels of education will read more for entertainment versus people that have higher levels of education will read more for kind of to find specific pieces of information. But we found that it's not just like low education generally. It's like people that might have a little bit less education in science, like formal science education, but they're still really interested in science. They might be reading these kind of fun blogs, popular science blogs, to learn more about science because they're interested, but they might not have high levels of education in science. And then there was this info-seeking users that kind of like, they're looking for information they can't find anywhere else. So some might be other scientists who are reading your blog because they want to know more about your research. They tend to be very highly educated. They have backgrounds in science. And like they're really reading for your perspective and your information that they can't find anywhere else. And then what I think is a really interesting group is these super users. So we call them super because they're just reading for all motivations. But unlike the other users, they're reading for community-driven motivation. So they want to engage with you. They're tweeting about you. They're sharing your blog post. They're the ones that actually, if you want to help spread your content other places, you want to cater to these users because they're the ones that are actually sharing and potentially commenting. And so, they might care that you respond to their comments or that you provide opportunities to engage with you because they care about that stuff. They want to kind of create a community of other people that care about what they care about. And so kind of in summary, there's these three types of users, and they're reading for, to find information they can't find anywhere else, but also to be entertained and to find community. But one of the kind of most important things that came from this study that was really interesting was that actually we did a test, a quiz for these people of their general scientific knowledge. And people that read for entertainment had the highest levels of just general science knowledge. So like if you were taking that Pew quiz where it asked you like general science quiz types of questions, they scored the highest. And so, we can't say anything about cause and effect because of the nature of the study, but it's really interesting to think about what about these users might be driving them maybe to consume a large variety of popular science content that gives them a really broad base of general science knowledge, perhaps, even though they don't have really high levels of formal education in science. And so, we can't say for sure, but it might be something to where if we want to increase public literacy in science, we might focus on sharing aspects of the scientific process, but also in a very entertaining way, ways that would cater to these entertainment users who don't know a whole lot about, don't have really formal education in science, but are interested in it. So, kind of wrapping up that, I just want to present some kind of general tips for science communication and social media. So if I wanted you to remember anything when you're going out and engaging on social media as a scientist, it's these kind of three things. It's to remember that social media is social. So just like those super users who are reading for a community, the basis of social media is social connections. So many people forget that. It's not just broadcast media that you can get content out. It's about connecting with people. And so ways to make your social media engagement to encourage comments from other people, to answer people's questions, to get into this two-way communication mode is one of the best things you can do to really boost your social media. And so part of that could just be following other people, not just having a Twitter page where everyone follows you, you have like 0 people that you follow. It means you're probably a broadcaster, you don't really engage with other people. Whereas the power of social media is engagement. So try to follow people, interact with other people, respond when people comment about, people aren't really commenting so much on blogs anymore, but they might comment on your Facebook page or somewhere else, then you can respond to them there. And that a lot of people also forget that social media is not just a place to spread out. You have information you've created for your websites. Social media is just a platform that you can push it out there. Really, that's a poor use of social media. Social media should be a place where you create content for the platform that you're using. It should be original. It should be creative. It should be things that you care about, and this is the things that will resonate with other people. And finally, we've talked a lot about this, but knowing your audience too. So kind of this reason why we looked at these different types of users of science blogs and trying to learn more about their motivations, because we need to know our audience in order to best communicate with them. And so I always like to talk about, in talks about science communication and social media, I love to talk about these kind of modes of science communication. So the fact that, this kind of tracks through time too, that at one point we were focused largely on deficit forms of communication. So the public didn't know enough. We need to teach them about science. We need to get facts into their heads. So we're going to approach it from this deficit model. We're assuming that our audience is just a pail that we can fill up with information. And that's, a lot of research has shown that it's a really bad way to communicate with people. It just doesn't really work. And so better forms of communication are getting into the dialogue model of engaging with people, asking people for input on the science that you're doing. And then even participation, things like citizen science, starting a Facebook group where, like there's one in Louisiana, citizen science project that we have at LSU, where they're encouraging people to find, if they see red foxes around Louisiana, to take a picture and to send them the information on where the fox is. And they've started to create this map of where foxes are in Baton Rouge and what they're eating and what they're doing. And it's become this very collaborative, citizen science project that people are really invested in because they see themselves participating in science. And it can be actually a really powerful thing for people to, identify themselves with scientists. If they're actually feeling like they're contributing to science, that can help a lot. And so I think that could be the power of social media, is you can have people give input into science and to see your life as a scientist and to ask you questions. I think that's the best use of social media as opposed to just a way to push information out in a one-way manner. And so just some tips that I have if you're going to go using social media would be, one, to just be yourself. Because to engage with people and to have this two-way form of communication, there has to be some transparency and authenticity on your part, and actually opening yourself up to being known by other people, which can be scary for a scientist. But that is the way people are going to engage with you. If you seem really closed off or nervous or not revealing much about your personal life as a scientist, like in your social media, then people might not be, as likely to engage with you. Another tip I would have would be to reveal yourself as a human. I mean, we've talked a lot about how researchers need to, just humanize themselves. And there's some research that backs this up. So there's some research by Susan Fisk in PNAS that just basically shows this. They've kind of put different occupations on this scale of, on one end, competence, on the other end, warmth. And so you can see where scientists are, they're basically considered really competent, but not necessarily super warm, super relatable people. And so people trust scientists. I see a lot of talk of people like there's this trust issue, but I mean, really on a broad level, if you ask citizens like who they trust, scientists are rate very, very highly on that scale. It's this level of being relatable, of being a human, of feeling like you could relate to them that's the issue. And so showing yourself as a human as well as a scientist through social media might be a good way to combat some of these perceptions. And then just to find that kind of wow factor, find the beauty in your science again, whether it's anything in the lab, in the field, just what really excites you about your science. And if you focus on those things, you're probably going to engage an audience. Because if you find it exciting or beautiful or weird, an audience probably will too. So think about that when you're thinking about what to share about your science. And another one is just to know your audience, to know who they are. So that might be thinking about what are you passionate about? Are you passionate about talking to kids or talking to other researchers, other people that you don't care to share your science with? Is there an audience you think that is kind of primed already to hear about what you have to share? Try to think through, as a researcher, what are your goals? Who do you want to communicate with? Who might be easy for you to communicate with? What audience can you tap into that maybe you already have or that your institution already has? Try to start thinking strategically about who your audience is and who you want them to be, and focus on that when you're thinking about what you want to share and how you're going to share it. Flagging. Oh, and then finally is storytelling. And so we've talked a lot about that throughout this conference. We've had some great discussions on what storytelling is. But my only point to add there, I guess, to what's already been said is that number one, storytelling is part of the scientific process. This is basically how we would write a research paper, and it is a story. It follows a story arc. And so scientists are not bad storytellers. They're amazing storytellers. It's just that trying to connect with what the audience would really care about and telling a story is the important thing. And so there's a lot of different elements that form story, like that narrative arc, characters, analogies, setting. But one of the key things I haven't heard talked about so far that actually I've read this great book called Wired for Story by Lisa Cron, and she talks about what is the key element that makes a story. And this is what it is. It is, I have a quote by it, but maybe I can kind of get it right, is that Story is how what happens, so the plot, changes a character from the beginning to the end of the story. So how this character faces the plot, the things that happen, and changes as a result. So any story, any very popular story that you've heard about, maybe let's take Star Wars. You take characters, and if you look at them from the beginning of the movie to the end of the movie, they're not the same. They've gone through a journey that changed them. Maybe it changed their perspective, maybe they got a new insight, maybe they got some new powers, but in the end, they're different than they were before. And so I think that as storytellers, as scientists, if you really want to get to the key of the story, it could be about yourself. It could be about how did you start at the beginning of this research project, you did this research, how are you different as a result? Have your perspective changed? Did you decide to go into a different career path, or was this a result? Like, what happened to you that's now different? And telling that story, that's the very crux of what people are going to want to hear. Storytelling is a process that people learn lessons by. It's why we painted on cave walls, to teach other people. When people read a story, they want to know, what can they get from this that they can take as a lesson throughout life? So maybe it's how to face an obstacle and never give up. Maybe it's, something like that anyone could relate to. That story that you could tell as a scientist about your research that anyone could relate to, that talks about you as the character facing an obstacle and what changed as a result of that by the end of this project or this research. That'd be kind of the key element of telling your story. And that is it. So I've linked some resources, but I'll also share these slides on my Twitter if you follow me there, so you can have all these things.
We have a couple minutes for questions.
Yeah, sorry, I went a little bit longer.
So there are websites and Facebook pages I'm sure we all kind of know about. And a lot of these I feel like revolve around like health, and they cite like science that's not real science, kind of like, eat cabbage for a week and cure cancer. Or, a lot of anti-vaccination type,
Right.
that kind of world, right? So, and they are typically proliferated by social media. And I guess legitimate outlets like you guys, how do you kind of set yourselves apart from that, like within the psyche of social media users? And do you feel, I guess competition wouldn't be the right word, but it essentially is kind of getting people to understand the difference between like real science, even if it's pop science, right, which is still real science depending on the science that's done, and then just people that are, maybe it's a mom that like starts a website about anti-vaccination stuff. I'm not, I'm not hating on that.
Yeah,
I'm just saying
no.
like that world. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, basically what you're hitting on, so I've talked a lot about like the good things about social media. That's essentially the worst thing about social media, is that it's great at getting information out there, which means it's great at getting misinformation out there. Yeah. It's something, I guess, it kind of comes with the territory. I mean, in increasing people's access to information and where information spreads, it automatically means misinformation can spread. I mean, there's a lot, it's actually basically a really hard question. And there's a lot of talk about how do we kind of vet social media, vet certain sites or present them as these are the scientific ones. I mean, even in Google search results, like how do we get people to know what's good information and what's bad? I mean, some of that comes to like, there's increasingly a focus in mass communication schools to focus on information literacy or media literacy. So teaching students like how to know when they go to a site, like to try to find how do you find information about the author? Who is writing this? What's the source? How do you know it's good information and bad information? And unfortunately, there's studies that show like teens today are terrible about differentiating what is sponsored content and what is like not sponsored content. It's really scary and bad. So I mean, some of that comes to like education of media literacy. But as far as what you can do to present yourself as a source, I mean, I guess things about giving people easy access to know who you are, what kind of credentials you have. Do you easily, on your blog, do you have an about page that tells about you and your credentials and why people should find you as credible? Do you cite your scientific sources? I don't know, do you link to other things? I mean, there's some bloggers who link to other sources that seem reliable. I mean, there's plenty of things you can do to kind of send signals to people that you're a good information source. But you know, if they find another blog who doesn't cite anything, it doesn't have good information, it doesn't say anything about themselves and their credentials, and they still find that reliable, I mean, that's a problem of them, you know, their kind of media literacy skills.
I feel like it's similar between like differentiating between like the NPR of science communication and the Alex Jones website of communication. You know what I mean? Like, how do you? Yeah. But it's really great that there's research in media literacy.
The only
We
thing I
need
can
it.
recommend is that you scientists be out there, because if we're not, well, it doesn't help anything. If there's only the people that are spreading misinformation out there and not people that are spreading good information, that's a problem.
Let's take one more question on the mic. Thank you. So, awesome work. You're totally preaching to the choir. My name's Tina, and I'm an avid social media user. And one thing that I've come across is the IRB. And my question for you is, how did you have those conversations with the IRB regarding social media? I have this project myself where I've been trying to look at hashtag use in my field of audiology, like looking at how is hashtag hearing loss used or hashtag hearing aids. And I have made some casual observations that I would like to formally write up and submit to a journal. The problem is that the journals require IRB approval, and it's my IRB's interpretation that social media cannot be used for data mining purposes, even when users have public profiles.
That's strange. So, I mean, usually, it might be the population that you're dealing with, maybe?
Institutional Review Board, they're sort of like the police for all for all human research projects and titles. So specifically for me, I work for the VA, so I'm affiliated with the federal government, and it is probably why maybe things are different at private academic institutions, but that seems like it might be the case for you. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so I mean, IRB is a thing I regularly, you know, all these studies where I either interview people or look at their social media has to be IRB approved. Usually, IRB is really like to make sure you're not doing anything really bad to people, essentially. So as long as you're like just looking at what they've already put out there or interviewing people, usually you shouldn't have any problem. I would say, like, sometimes if you're dealing with children or people with disabilities, they get a little bit strange about it. So maybe that's why, because you're looking at hearing loss. But usually it's a pretty simple process. So I would.
Yeah, one of their arguments has been that hashtag or like Twitter handles in general could be interpreted as PHI, which I also respectfully disagree with, because if you have a public profile on Twitter or Facebook, and if you're putting that out there, you're making casual observations as a scientist, and you're not doing research on them. Their argument is that it would require a research protocol, and therefore it has to be approved, but it's not allowed.
That's strange.
Okay.
But yeah, so maybe you, if you want to
There's
email
hope.
me, I can. Yeah, but I haven't had any trouble with doing social media research. But yeah, you always want to before you before you even do it, you know, get IRB approval.
Well, let's thank Paige.